Hello, everybody, and welcome to Virtual Bourbon. We have a fun event tonight. Wes Hardin is back with us. He's doing his Dusty series where he's got a vintage bottle of Maker's Mark as well as a current one as well. And we're going to be tasting both of those on a blind basis and seeing what's going on there. And we'll have Jane Bowie with us as well. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Mr. Wes Hardin. Wes, how you doing, man?
Hey, Steve, how's it going, man?
Very good, very good. And I would also like to officially introduce Jane Bowie. Jane, how are you?
I'm drinking whiskey with y'all on a Tuesday night. It's pretty good.
It's not bad, right? It's not a bad gig. So Jane is the Director of Innovation and Master of Maturation. That's a couple pretty cool titles you got there, Jane.
Yeah, there's a lot of bullshit in titling but yeah, I spend most of my day with my nose in a glass and trying to figure out what the hell's going on in a warehouse.
Yeah, we've been really excited about this event because when we think of makers, more so than anybody else, it's about consistency. You know, when you guys have expanded, you had to get the exact same equipment, the exact same time of fermenters. You rotate stock, so everything is. So all the Maker's Mark story is about consistency. So we're going to put this to the test a little bit by tasting two bottles about 40 years apart. So that's pretty cool, huh?
Very cool.
Yeah, I think the greatest compliment could be if we don't do as good as we normally do. If less people pick out the Dusties than usual, I think that's a really testament to what Makers is doing there. But we'll see what happens. We'll see. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Wes, who will kind of run the show a little bit, kind of get into some history. Jane, as always, we encourage our distillery representatives to jump in at any time. There may be things that you know and add on. We want you to do that. Okay.
Perfect.
All right, Wes, go ahead, my friend. It's all to you now.
All right, welcome everyone. So we've got a lot of repeat guests on the Dusty series. We do have some newcomers, so I just want to briefly go through how this is going to work. So Makers is obviously a beloved brand, maybe one of, if not the most beloved brand there is in American whiskey, especially bourbon. So there's a ton of history, even though the company hasn't been around as long as some of the legacy brands and company. It just has a really unique history. So I'm just going to touch on some high points. Definitely with Jane here, I'm going to be put to the task of what I'm going through. She's going to supplement some of the history that I go through with, personal stories and a lot of the bourbon industry. A lot of it's documented, and a lot of it is passed on from generation to generation and person to person, just through conversations over a pour and so forth. But what we're going to do is I'm going to start off with a little bit of history. We'll take a break. We're going to sample number one. We'll talk through the tasting and the nosing and so forth. I asked everyone, we want your ideas on what you're tasting, what you're smelling, what you're seeing in the glass, but we want you to hold your guesses till the end, please. And then we'll go through some more history. We'll take a look at sample number two. We'll go through that process again. We'll finish up the history, have some conversation. At the very end, we will go through roundtable person by person, and we will be asking everyone to vote on A, what was your favorite, and B, which one you think is the Dusty. And it doesn't necessarily have to be one and the same. So with that, I'm going to get started. So what I'm going to do, I kind of broke this down. There's a lot of different ways you can go with Makers. I decided to break it down to this first little section. It's just general Makers brand and distillery history. Because I'm always on the hunt for Dusties, I chose purposely not to get into pre-Loretto history. So I chose not to get into the T.W. Samuels and the old distillery. I'm hoping one day to find a bottle of that. And if so, it would be a separate event and we would dig into the really deep history. So I'm specifically going to go through we're going to start in the 50s when Makers started. So obviously Maker's Mark is what we're talking about. Company was started in 53 when Bill Samuels Sr. Purchased the Burke's Distillery in Loretto, which is where the distillery is today. Beautiful property, expanded over the years, obviously. He began production in 54, and the first bottle run was in 1958. And that's when they came out of the chute with the trademark dipped red wax seal. We'll get into that and who was really responsible for that a little bit later. So I've broken this into Makers in general. And then the second history session, I'm going to talk about Bill Sr. and Margie a little bit. And then we're going to get into Bill Samuels Jr. kind of at the end. And obviously, Jane, jump in here anytime. And hopefully I'm not wrong with anything, but if I am, feel free to correct me.
If he is, call him out. Call him
out. I'm on a murderer's row run on these events. I've had I've had the nose that I've had to go through beam history with in front of
Fred and Freddie both.
Freddie. Yeah, I've had to go through that. We had Freddie Johnson on a Dusty Blanton's last week, so I had to go through history in front of him, and I'll have to sit here in front of Jane and go through Maker's history. So
yeah, no pressure, no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure at all. Like just another day at the office, right?
I mean, don't worry, I'm not shy, so I'll let you know.
Yeah, we know.
Yes, yeah.
Steve loves this part of it. He's hoping somebody's gonna.
Oh yeah, I want him to.
He wants somebody to whack me one time.
Right,
We'll
exactly.
We'll see what happens.
Well, with Bill Samuels, there's probably a right version in whatever you're saying.
Yep, I'm hoping I hit the right one and you tell me the wrong one, because it's even probably more entertaining that way. So, Makers in general, we all know Makers. It's a mash bill, 70 corn. 16% red winter wheat and the 14 malted barley. That has never changed. It's always been the mash bill. What's strange about this, and this is one of these kind of, it's maybe a fact and it's maybe somewhere in between, but as one of the facts go, there were actually 6 or 7 candidates for the mash bill for this new bourbon when Bill Sr. decided to purchase this distillery and started up, and he didn't have the time, or didn't feel like he had the time to actually mash and distill all of those 6 or 7 versions. So he actually had bread loaves made from each of the recipes, and decided that this winter wheat version was the one that tasted and smelled the best, and that's what he wanted his whiskey to taste like. Is that an absolute fact?
It's hard to prove if it's absolute fact, and I'll be honest, I've called bullshit. I've worked for Makers 15 years, and that was the story I always struggled. And we've been doing wheat research in a pretty real way for the last 5 years with the University of Kentucky. And we recreated that whole scenario. And whether it happened or not, it's a great idea and it's super feasible. Like, I sit on a bread taste panel for the University of Kentucky with their wheat breeders and what they're doing. And it was a great way. He didn't have a taste vision that was like, I want hints of caramel with subtle vanilla. It wasn't like that. His taste vision was really about approachability and the balance and the kind of flavors that really spoke to him. And so that is absolutely feasible. They could have baked bread to understand mouthfeel and flavor and what they were looking for, especially because they had always distilled rye. And so wheat was a whole new ballgame for them.
Yep, absolutely. What's interesting, and I'll get into a little bit of it later, but he purposely wanted to change the mash bill. He wanted to get away from the old quote unquote family recipe, which back then the old family recipe was pre-prohibition, post-prohibition up until the 40s and 50s, and most everyone, in fact, pretty much everyone besides Stitzel-Weller and then Makers were predominantly using a rye mash bill. There was very little wheat in the mash bill. So, every mash bill can potentially get into different areas of the flavor wheel, but in general, the ryes are a little bit spicier, a little more earthy, and then obviously you get a little more of the sweetness and a little of the more refreshing part on the wheat side. So he was purposely he wanted to go away from what he considered the harsh old family whiskey recipe when he chose this mash bill.
And I wouldn't underestimate, the only thing I would add, I think people always ignore the malted barley when it comes to bourbon, right? It's there for amylase and enzymes, but 14% is high.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so we're getting flavor and complexity from that as well. So I think the fact that he went with a 70-30 primary to small grains, and he gave barley, almost half of that small grain. I think people discredit that because it's always just about enzymes, but there's a lot of flavor coming from that as well.
No, absolutely. And I think that's a big part of the reason the difference between MGP ryes and some of the Kentucky ryes is the added corn makes a difference, but also a lot of the Kentucky ryes have a much higher percentage of the malted barley, and I think that helps round it out as well. You're absolutely correct. The rumor, it's not a rumor, it's a fact. He received some of his mash bill assistance and some help with the recipe from none other than our good buddy Pappy Van Winkle from Stitzel-Weller. They obviously were making a wheated mash bill there at Stitzel-Weller for O. Fitzgerald, and what ended up becoming all the different Pappy variations, Cabin Still, Rebel Yell, and so forth. Makers has always been around 6 year. I say around 6 year, bottled at 90 proof. The one exception, and this is kind of a cool little thing that tells you how fervent of a fan and a loyalty base that Makers made over the years. So we'll go through some of the history of how the brand moved around, but the exception to the proofing rule came about on specifically February 9th of 2013. The company decided, whether there was one or not, they decided there's a supply chain issue, and let's take the proof from 90 to 84. So at that time, the tasting panel on site decided, there's not going to be any tasting difference. Some of the industry analysts at the time suggested that it's going to be minimal difference. They announced it. Basically, a few days later, they decided to come out and say, you know what, we decided not to. They received a tremendous amount of backlash from their dedicated customer base that basically said, don't F with my Makers. I want it at 90. This is where it's at. I like it. Don't move it or else. And
that's an example, Jane, right, where that kind of comes back to get you, because people feel like Makers is their own. It's very
right.
personal to them, and they love it, and there's such brand loyalty there. But that's a reverse thing when it can come back and get you a little bit too, right?
It was the best and worst week.
Yeah.
I think it was. No one was happy about the decision. The shelves were empty. Demand, it's right when bourbon mania was sweeping the nation. And we said the shelves can sit empty. And I don't mean a little empty. The shelves can sit empty. We can cut age, which we're not comfortable with. We have the number one thing we're most proud of. We're a single source of supply. In almost 70 years, we have never sold whiskey to anyone. And we have never bought whiskey. Every drop that has gone in a bottle of Makers, we produce ourselves on Star Hill Farm in Loretto, Kentucky. And so the options, so it was an ounce of water per liter is what we added. And there was a difference. Like taste panel, I'm not going to be like, everybody's like, yep, it's the same. No, if you drink Makers neat and that taste profile, it was different. But it felt like the choice we could live with. And boy, were we wrong. And I remember right before we sent the email out to ambassadors, we had like all these meetings. It was almost like a war room where it was just like, what do we think is going to happen? Are people going to care? Are people, what? Let's tell them. Let's not take away 3 ounces in my cereal box and charge me the same amount. Like, let's tell people it's coming.
Right.
And I remember Bill saying, what if nobody cares? Like, wouldn't that be worse that nobody cares? And then 3 days later, we're like, that sounds pretty good with that nobody caring thing. Because it was wonderful. It really changed our perspective of a lot of things internally. Honestly, it really changed the trajectory of how we thought about taking care of the brand and our own stewardship, because it's not just ours. It belongs to all the consumers that have kept us in business for 7 years. So
it's a great.
It was a really hard week. It was a hard week. And it was a multi-million-dollar mistake. It was not a marketing. I wish we were that smart. But it was, I remember it like it was yesterday.
Yeah, I think Makers deserves credit because especially at the time of the bourbon boom, there's a lot of your competitors that made decisions to reduce age statements. They were proofing down some things. They eliminated certain brands and things of that nature. So it would have been very easy for Makers to take all of the feedback and say, we appreciate the feedback, but if you want Makers, this is what we have to do. But instead, you guys did what I consider the right thing as a consumer and said, no, we preach consistency, quality. You know what you're going to get when you get Makers. It's going to be 90 proof. It's going to be a soft, approachable, flavorful bourbon. And credit to Makers for listening to the feedback of its core base and saying, you know what, that's not such a good idea. Let's keep making what we've always made, and we'll catch up sooner or later. So I think Makers deserves a lot of credit for that. They didn't buckle under just economic pressures.
Yeah.
I agree. A little bit more on the brand history. In 74, the distillery was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And in 1980, it was actually registered as a historic landmark, but it was listed under the Burke's Distillery name. So the Burke's Distillery was actually named many years before the Samuels bought it. It was the first distillery, I didn't know this, it was the first distillery in America to be recognized as a landmark while the buildings were still in operation. So if you think about that, there's obviously more buildings before Makers that were listed as a national landmark, but it was the first distillery that was listed as one that was still operational. So if you look at Stitzel-Weller, had been mothballed for years. A lot of the old distilleries were either raised or gone, but it was the first one that was recognized and registered, but it was still producing production on a day-to-day basis. It still has. It like a lot of bourbon brands and companies during the slow times in the 70s, 80s, 90s, went through a few ownership changes. 81, they sold to Hiram Walker, who was then acquired by Akley Demek in 87. Allied Demek was then acquired by Penrose Ricard in 2005. And then Maker's brand was sold to Fortune Brands. Fortune split. They took their alcohol division, and that became Beam Incorporated. And then obviously Beam became Beam Suntory in 14. So that's kind of a quick history of, Makers is always to everyone, especially just, consumers. Makers has always been Makers, It's been out of the same distillery. There's nothing changed, but just as the way U.S. business and corporate entities and acquisitions roll, it was not spared from some of that 80s and 90s shifting of ownership when the industry was crazy and everybody was trying to find ways to survive, and people kept getting bought up. So it was part of that, but I think it obviously ended up in really solid hands with Beam Suntory. I think, at least from our side of the fence, it appears that it has. And then Steve mentioned it, I think, early on in the opening. Makers is famous for rotating its barrels, and I say in an attempt, but it obviously works. The idea there is to produce the most consistent bourbon, same quality, same taste profile, consistent as you possibly can be, intermingling individual barrels, which always have their individual barrels are somewhat inconsistent by design and by nature. But they rotate the barrels. It's been a while since I've actually been on a tour. I've been to Makers for private barrel selections and so forth. You guys are still rotating, correct?
We are, just to give you some fun stats, because when people always go, I don't believe that, I'm like, let me introduce you to our warehouse team. We have 1.1 million barrels in inventory spread across 49 different warehouses on 3 different sites. And all the barrels, not all, disclaimer, barrels stay within their own house. So how it works is, if you have a 7-story warehouse, 7 goes to 1, 6 goes to 2, 5 goes to 3, 4 stays put. So every warehouse has a different rotation method. We begin rotating. Our summer officially ends August 1st is how we classify our summer trade-off at Maker's Mark. So August 1st every year, Taste Panel starts going through samples and marking barrels or lots as ready to be rotated, meaning they're at a certain maturation level. Our requirement is a barrel needs 3 Kentucky summers at the top of a warehouse, where you're getting all that extraction. You're really giving it an extreme environment, the difference of the humidity levels, the airflow, the temperature. It's just a totally different climate. After 3 summers, they'll physically take those 525-pound barrels and they'll invert them in the warehouse. The bottom floors go to be bottled and they'll move. So this last year, I think we rotated just over 200,000 barrels.
Wow.
And if we could find a better way, I don't know that we would, but holy shit, it's labor intensive. So I think people still rotate some for certain specific products, but I think is like a standard practice. I don't know anyone else that does it, especially at our scale.
Yeah.
I don't think there is.
We make one thing, right? So cross-sectioning and that's not a thing for us. So giving each barrel the same life cycle makes a lot of sense. And it makes formulation easier on the back end, honestly.
Yeah, you kind of over time you know what you're going to get from each area, and you can kind of keep them fairly consistent. I would think obviously different years and different seasons yield different levels of heat and cold and everything, but overall,
Yep.
yeah, it's pretty proven.
Yeah. Actually,
All right,
I
so
just finished a 2-year maturation scale project where we just redid all of our maturation scales for, it's like a timeline of warehouse styles if you come to our distillery. So an 1889 warehouse looks very different from a 2021 as far as size and scale. Sorry, keep going.
oh no, you're fine. So let's take a second. Let's go ahead and start. If you haven't poured sample one, let's pour sample one. There you or A. I'm sorry. Sometimes I do 1 and 2. Sometimes I do A and B. I'm sorry. Let's go A/1. And let's do our thing, everybody, at your own discretion. Let's nose, let's sip it, let's smell it, and I'm interested on nosing, tasting notes, and so forth from everyone. Not everybody at once. I'm going to start calling you out.
Really, strong, like creme brulee kind of nose. Kind of smells like smells like bourbon, for lack of a better phrase.
That's fair. We count that as an official note on our group. So yeah,
Smells like bourbon. Good. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
I see McNew's on here. I know McNew's going to say it just smells like bourbon, but I still want her to talk anyway.
Yep, it smells like bourbon for sure.
All right, there we go. It's official. We have two people that think it smells like bourbon.
It does, but that creme brulee was like a really good call out. Like it definitely has like that bakery sweet smell to it for sure.
Yeah, I say I definitely get the creme brulee, but I get like a almost like a cherry, strudel or a cherry cobbler kind of thing. I get a little bit of stone fruit in there to go along with that to kind of round it out.
Yeah. Interesting. All right, let's taste it. Let's see what we got here. That's pretty darn good.
It's really good.
Yeah, you definitely get that little bit of that cherry strudel taste there.
Yeah, I actually get a lot more of the fruit on the palate than I did. And it finishes just like what you would think a 90 proof would. It's like creeping up on that 100 proof, but it's much, to me, even though it's 4 proof points, there's a big difference between 86 and 90 to me. It's like that break. When you get to 90, you start getting into that. You get a good Kentucky hug, but it's not like high octane barrel proof, burning your olfactory out, killing your palate.
Melanie Robinson's always good to call on. So she's yeah. Melanie, what do you got?
I like it.
Yeah, there's no bill tonight, so I guess
I know somebody had to do it. Very approachable, the creme brulee and Wes the cherry, and a very gentle, pleasant hug.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
I see Mike Gaskamp is unmuted. He's ready to fire away. What's going on over there, Mike?
Okay, Mike's.
Well, it tastes like Makers, which is a good thing because that's what's in here. I'd be scared if it tasted like something else. Yeah, I'm kind of going with you on the stone fruit, Wes. I kind of can pick up that kind of creme brulee dairy kind of thing going on in the back, but the mouthfeel is really exceptional because it is kind of like just a nice melted butter that just kind of hangs around and makes you want to pour another bottle.
It coats the whole tongue and throat like it's just a nice, very viscous, nice coating.
Yeah, you get that, and then that little hint of a Kentucky hug to go with it, and it's pretty damn enjoyable.
Absolutely.
I love that you said. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Scott, go.
Interestingly, for me on this one, for some reason, with all the stuff you said before, I agree with that. But on the very, very end, I get a little bit of butterscotch.
Okay. That's
good. I tricked you, Scott. I changed yours out for an old
granddad,
old Taylor, an old granddad. Okay, I tricked you, sir.
Yeah.
I definitely get that too. I get that sweetness, like a sugary sweetness from
that. Very, very back on the finish thing.
Yeah, I agree. All right. I am, unless anybody else has any other input, I'm going to jump in and kind of go into the next section of.
I think we're off to a good
Maker's
start. I like that one. So it'll be interesting to see how the other one tastes and compares. That's really good. That's a good start.
All right. So what I want to do now is, I gave a very basic background of Makers and how long Makers has been around, who started the company, who actually purchased the distillery, started the company. What I want to get into is some of the key players. I want to start with not only Bill Sr., but his wife Margie. So you can't really talk about Makers, and you can't talk about Bill Sr. without talking about Margie. So they had a really clear, a very clear line of who kind of dealt with what. So he dealt with production, the facilities, getting the place up and running and making the whiskey. She was at the forefront, and she in some ways kind of dominated over him and made the decisions whether he liked it or not in relation to marketing, labeling, bottling, the whole 9 yards. So we'll get into some of that. So Bill Samuels Jr., he was actually the great grandson of T.W. Samuels. So it should be a very familiar name to most everyone. T.W. Samuels is still a product that's made today. It's kind of considered a little bit of a bottom shelfer today, but he is the great grandson of T.W. Samuels. Again, they're super hard to find, but I'm trying to obtain an old T.W. Samuels Dusty where we can really get into the history of the
So
Samuels
have you
family.
seen some of those out there, Wes? I know you haven't acquired one, but do you see people trading those out there?
There's a handful running around, and I wouldn't be either. Most people are not willing to part with those if they find them, but sooner or later I'll come across somebody who's looking to move one, and we'll bring it in for the group. And he actually created Maker's Mark after selling the old T.W. Samuels distillery. So that old T.W. Samuels distillery was the family distillery, obviously passed down over the years. It ended up with Bill Sr. And he sold that in quote unquote retirement. He got a little bored, and I think he drove Margie crazy. So he purchased the Burke's distillery. And kind of what we talked about earlier, he really didn't like the old T.W. Samuels family recipe. It was rye as a second grain, which obviously is, in his words, made it harsh. In our words, it's spicy and a little peppery and things that rye does to bourbon and whiskey. So he decided, I want to make something a little more refined, a little more approachable. And then so he got into the whole, he ended up with the wheated mash bill that they have today. It's, to me, I would say that, because he has the Samuels name and the family legacy that goes down, he gets the credit for purchasing the distillery and so forth. I don't know that Maker's Mark, to me, my opinion from the outside, obviously, I don't know that Maker's Mark is what it is today, without Bill Jr., which we'll talk about later. But more importantly, before Bill Jr., when he was a wee lad, his mother, Margie. I don't know, without some of the marketing and packaging and presentation decisions she made, that brand as an upstart in the 50s, which it was the middle to late 50s. So if you fast forward 10 years, that's the end of the 60s, first of the 70s is when the bourbon decline started. So they didn't really have a long runway compared to other companies that have been around for a long time that would have set on aged stock and been able to sell it off at lower proofs and so forth. I think without her, I don't know if we're sitting here doing this event today, or at least Makers is that big of a name. So
yeah, basically everything you see here, she did, from the
label
to the font to the wax.
That's where we're getting ready to go through all that right now. So she was the driving force behind, I say many, but basically all the marketing and packaging, at least until Bill Jr. came onto the company later on, and we'll go through that later. Bill handled operations. She handled the brand. She was I didn't know this either. She was a graduate of U of L, had a chemistry degree, but really didn't care and didn't get into the distilling part of it. She did have the chemistry degree. She invented the Maker's Mark brand. There's no way around it. She absolutely created it. She came up with the logo. So the star actually represents the name of the farmland that the distillery's on, which is Star Hill Farms. If you got that bottle, Steve, you want to pop it up there. Everyone here has seen the bottle, but we'll go through it. The S is for the Samuels family name. The 4 is for the reference to Bill Samuels being a 4th generation distiller. So that whole little S4 star circle on there, she came up with that entire thing. She designed the entire front label.
And even the breaks in here are important.
Yeah.
They represent the breaks in production.
That's right. Yeah, the whole thing, the font, she designed that whole label, and she had no experience and was not a graphic designer. She just literally came up with it in her kitchen. She came up with the name Maker's Mark, which was inspired to her by the identifying marks on English style pewter makers that they stamped into their work. So evidently she had old English style pewter pieces, and they had certain little stamps, and it was considered the Maker's Mark, the maker of the piece of art that she had, basically, and that's what she decided to call it. Probably her biggest contribution is the red dripping wax. It's iconic today. It's identifiable immediately on the shelf. There it is. There's a
overdip, as we
dip
found out
there.
on that interview.
Slam dunk. It's immediately identifiable on consumer shelves as Maker. You don't even have to look at the bottle. You see the little spout with the red wax. You know exactly what it is. She created it by experimenting, dipping bottles in melted sealing wax in her deep fryer, of all things. So, you know, she started off like a lot of craft rebottlers do today, where they'll buy MGP or Barton or whatever whiskey that's out on the market, and they'll create their own brand and labels, and they'll sit in their garage with crock pots and deep fryers, and they'll put wax and all kinds of crap on there. She was the first one to do it. It was trademarked. It still is trademarked. She chose that sealing wax specifically for its durability and its high melting point. So that's where some of her chemistry degree and experience would come in with that. The dripping red wax was trademarked in '85. And if you don't think Makers is serious about defending it, ask Diageo. Yeah, ask Diageo. So in 2005, Diageo was sued, and they lost by Makers over a line of their Jose Cuervo tequilas. They decided to just to dip the top, not the entire stem, but just to dip the top in red wax. And Maker's Mark came out swinging and sued them and kind of set the precedent. It's our red wax. It's our dip. If you try to mimic it, we're going to get you on it. And they will defend it as they should defend it.
It was like a cease and assist letter from Rob Samuels. Just get the bottle in your house and post it on social, and then you'll get a letter like a month later.
Yeah, you get a letter. Yeah.
No, that's the way it should be. So it's their signature. That red wax is the signature thing that.
And the drips too, because you'll see people use other colors, but they have to be clean. Yeah, they have to be. That's right. They have to be cut clean, so it's not dripping down on
the drips are the trademark.
Yep.
Yeah. Which is unbelievable.
Yeah.
What else is? Yeah, what else is unbelievable is that all of these are hand dipped to this day. It's just it's crazy to me that they're hand dipped. It's still under a huge scale, gives you what Makers is all about, which is craftsmanship, quality, personal touch, those type of things. It's just there's a long list of just little things that make Makers what it is. Their ambassador program would go on and on, but the fact that they employ people instead of going what I call the
engineering route
of engineering and machines over people. Nope, you go down and they've got people every day that are dipping these things. We were talking about Steve posted a few days ago. He found one of these out in the wild, and they have the slam dunk bottles that are out there, which is basically an over dip, for lack of better terms. Those are pretty cool if you can find one. And red waxes are go-to. However, they've had various other special release colored waxes for everything from sports teams, special occasions, derbies, Keeneland, whatever kind of special occasion, national championships for U of L, UK, pro sports teams. I've seen every color under the rainbow. A lot of the sports teams will be a double dip, where like a UK is a white with a blue on top, and a Louisville is a red with a black, or a black and a red, and so forth. The only other consistent color for everyday releases is the green for the mint julep.
Oh, yeah.
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 So the red for the red, and then the green
We're
for the
not
mint
doing it
julep.
anymore. You heard it here first.
Oh, it's not. Oh,
You're not doing that anymore?
No,
Oh, wow.
rejected.
Ooh.
no, we, yeah, that's, so if you liked it, sorry.
That's
can see the
scoop
rest.
right there.
Go
That's
clear the shell, Steve.
Yeah, I'll clear the shelves. I'll be out tomorrow. I
Dude,
gotta
the
snatch them
shelf
up.
life's only about 18 months. So,
Uh-huh. Oh,
you
darn
know,
it.
you know,
Well,
Yeah,
buy a bottle, Steve.
Bye. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
are they going to the red?
No,
Jane?
we're just not gonna make the mint julep anymore.
Oh,
Okay.
so it's
They
totally
did
going.
Kentucky once a year,
Yeah, I
right?
got it. I got it.
And it's the way people want. We can never make a cocktail in a bottle that's better than what a bartender
Right.
can make for you, or you can make for yourself at home. So it's something that was more sentimental, I think, than anything why we had kept doing it. And so, yeah,
Oh, can I put this in quick bourbon notes on Friday, or is it a
I
secret?
get they've not told me I'm not
I
allowed to
guess.
say. So
Yes. Okay.
if I might get a call tomorrow, but whatever.
If I get banned, I've got you as a friend, so I'll
No,
call you
it's
up.
but yeah, no, we just
It'll be like Steve's gone.
yeah, we just decided it just didn't make sense to do anymore. So
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
We got
Sorry.
scoop on one of these.
There's
events.
Scoop. We didn't anticipate getting Scoop.
And
I like it.
just as a fun fact, I think we're gonna dip about 30 million bottles by hand this year.
30 million. Holy cow.
Which that's Denny always gets on his soapbox. It's bedazzled. And says, I would love to see, you talk about big is bad sometimes, but the fact that we still hand rotate over 200,000 barrels and we're going to dip 30 million bottles, like it would be, show me any other distillery that does that stuff. It doesn't make the whiskey taste good, but to your point, Wes, I think it's our commitment to our people, our commitment, hand dipping the bottles. The whiskey was Bill and everything else was Margie, and we worked really hard to protect his vision. And so we do the same for hers. So it's 30 million bottles. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's a lot of the same philosophy, and the reason why a lot of people are moving much more away from box stores and shop local. It's the local person who puts the blood, sweat, and tears. Not the big corporations don't. I get it. They do. They've got people working hard like everyone else. But buying chocolate from a local chocolatier versus going out and buying Dove or whatever the case is, there's a bit of personality into it, and it's someone's, that's someone's baby, and you're helping. You guys are a huge company now, but the point is, as a huge company, you haven't lost that personal touch with the consumer.
They haven't lost it. Yeah, they still do it. No,
absolutely. And so kind of the last thing with Margie, she was posthumously inducted into the Bourbon Hall of Fame in 2014. So she is part of the Bourbon Hall of Fame as of 2014. So that's
very nice.
Kind of a quick little history of Bill Sr. and Margie, and because ultimately they purchased and started this distillery towards the end of their, in their careers, and even in some ways towards the back end of their life. So it's not a scenario where they were up and coming entrepreneurs in their 20s and they were at that distillery for 60 years and all that kind of stuff. They had a relatively short day-to-day working career. I mean, they were still around in the business for a while, but at some point Bill Jr. took over and they kind of like moved to the background until they
still loom large over the brand. That's the great thing is all the stuff that they set up, it still continues to this day. It's amazing to think about. Jane, we did one of these with your DNA series. And I know that you guys, of course, that's an experiment that you guys did. And ultimately your findings was the 110 proof, which you've always done is the way to go. Our group, we had 24 as a sellout, sold out. 110 is what we came up with too. So blind or a vote of what the favorite was. We ended up coming up with 110 was the favorite. So that was really cool. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
All right, so let's take a quick little siesta here, and let's jump into sample. Is it B? I think I labeled them.
Yep, B.
All right, B. Let's jump into B, and let's go through and see what we got here.
Okay. Also creme brulee, but a little bit more custardy, you know, a little bit different.
Yeah, I still get reset myself, make sure I'm not off here.
And much darker.
Yeah. Yeah. It is darker.
I feel like I'm getting a little bit more of the cherry in this one. On
Yeah,
the
that's where I
nose.
was going to go. This is to me, it's a big cherry bomb.
Mm-hmm. That's good. What else?
Getting a little syrup, maybe a little maple. Hang on in there.
Okay.
That's interesting.
I know somebody mentioned butterscotch on the first one, but this one seems much more butterscotch on the finish.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't gotten that far yet. I haven't tasted.
I cheated. I'm sorry.
Working ahead. Okay.
I tasted
Well,
them as soon as I got them. I was very
of course. All right, let's try it. Let's see where we're at.
A little thicker on the mouthfeel as well, and a little spicier, I think, than the first one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, also very good. Ooh.
It's really good.
Mm-hmm.
This is both of these are one of those, if you were to start too early in the afternoon and didn't have anywhere to go, you may have a early night.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So,
This one
right people.
seemed. Oh, sorry, Wes. This one seems to have a longer finish.
I agree. Yeah.
I would agree
does
with
seem-
that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really finish like a 90 proof.
Yeah.
No.
I like those
Nice.
glasses, by the way. Those are awesome.
Yeah.
And a little drier.
Yeah.
A little drier.
Oh,
Yeah.
Mhm.
What year's the first one specifically, Wes? Do you know, or is it like sometimes you can't get it down to the year, but early 80s?
First one?
Yeah.
Are you talking
I'm talking about the older one, not necessarily A versus B or anything like that, but the older one.
So the Dusty is 83, and then
83. Okay.
The recent one is like
So
20.
almost 40 years, 39 years old. on
Yeah,
the
exactly.
Dusty. Yeah.
It's a long time in a bottle.
Yeah.
It is.
Mhm.
It is.
I'll say this. A lot of times, and again, 40 years is a long time. A lot of times they'll have kind of that dusty funk, if you will. And I don't get that from either of these. These are both whiskeys that taste like they could have been purchased last week.
I'll
to
say
me.
for the first time in a long time,
Mhm.
when I opened up the Dusty, I had a feeling it was going to be a screw cap. I didn't know 100% for sure. I thought it was going to be, but it was a screw cap as opposed to a cork. And I think part of what Jane was talking about before.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, part of what she was talking about before we came on was vintage whiskey that back then a lot of the corks were natural corks. So you worry about a little cork taint, you worry about some seepage, you worry about oxidation. I know that any non-clear decanter for vintage is usually a good value on the money because they're not as expensive to obtain versus like a glass Dusty. But it's a total crapshoot. Like I've opened some of those up and poured them out, and they were a cloudy, gunky mess where the cork had given way and seeped in, and total oxidation happened. But I've had some of those that were crystal clear. To me, if they were 100 proof or 90 proof, they were absolutely as stellar as you would think they would be. And I've had everything in between. But when I opened this one up and pulled the wax back, I was like, oh, great, it is a screw cap. I thought it was. I was excited because I wasn't worried about cork degradation, seepage, cork disintegrating and making the whiskey kind of cloudy. Like I'll typically cheesecloth and strain some of those when that happens, but you can't get every fine little piece out of it. But I was happy about this one.
Did you have much liquid loss, or was it pretty well
No,
preserved?
it was an absolute full bottle. Yeah, actually the bottle, just comparison wise, size wise, they're both 750s. But the Dusty bottle is a little bit taller than the current bottle and a little bit streamlined. It's a little less chunky and a little taller.
A little taller and a little more rounded on the shoulders.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. The shoulders are higher but round, and it gets really tight, a little tighter at the bottom. But labeling wise, forget it. Blind taste test, you can't pick which one.
They look the same, huh?
No, you can't. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
the
impossible.
labels. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, the only difference would be that no, actually, in 83, I don't think there's a UPC code on the back of the Dusty. That's
Yeah,
from the label.
the verbiage will be a little different Obviously, 83 would have been signed by probably senior and junior, where now it's signed by Rob.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
There'll
I'll have to
be
take a look at
like
that.
some of the like romance copy will be a little different, but our label, our bottle's not changed a lot over 6
Yeah, it was strikingly identical. I was like, wow, they are very consistent. You would think there's a lot of brands that have been consistent up until Heaven Hill changed Old Fitzgerald to Larceny, and then came back out with the fancy schmancy decanters they have now. When they purchased Old Fitzgerald, other than the different UPC code for the different producer and the different DSP and so forth, those labels were consistent for years and years and years and years. But yeah, the makers are about as consistent for two different models that are 40 something years apart that I've seen for sure.
Mhm.
Any other tasting notes on B/number 2?
Okay.
Anybody? Everybody's enjoying?
Yeah.
Kevin Majors. I haven't heard from Kevin. He's lurking over there somewhere. There he
I'm not
is. I got a
Kevin, but I
smile
think
on him.
B's more flavorful.
I
Right.
think B's more flavorful. Okay.
All right. So I'm going to jump into the last part of our history portion, and then we'll have some conversation, take a couple of last sips of these, and we'll get to some voting. And then obviously we'll talk to Jane, and you guys can either, you feel free to use the chat for questions if you're camera shy too. We always take a look at that. So the last part of the history is really, I want to talk about Bill Samuels Jr. Obviously he's, to me, he may be the one person in bourbon that's had maybe the craziest life. I mean, there's probably some others you can argue. There's probably some crazy wild stories from Booker and some of those old timers. But as far as just like the life that someone's lived from the time that they were a youth up until hit the pinnacle, that he just had
he's movie worthy. Let's just say.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, he's written his book, but
yeah.
he's documentary at the minimum worthy. Like I'm talking like multiple session documentary, if not movie worthy. But let's go through some of the highlights. Jane obviously knows him well. She can jump in at any time. He is the son of Bill Sr. and Margie. He's a marketing genius. It's just as simple as it gets. He's a visionary. Was considered a bit of a maverick in the industry, kind of bucked some of the trends and things of that time. He's literally a rocket scientist, which is crazy if you think about it. And a lot of people's opinion is he single-handedly propelled a family business into one of the most recognizable and loved bourbon brands in history. Oddly enough, his next door neighbor when he was a kid was his godfather, Jim Beam. So here again is that bourbon tree that has a bunch of branches, but in some way has no branches. Everyone always just through marriage and so forth. It's like this core group of Dance and Beams and Samuels and all these people just intermingle with each other throughout history.
I'll put a link to when we interviewed him on a podcast, because we just had him telling stories literally about all these people, from Colonel Sanders to Pappy Van Winkle to Jim Beam. If you love old bourbon stories, I'll put a link to that episode.
Yeah, you should put that up. What I'm doing doesn't even give justice to the actual story. It's just hitting the highlights. Again, he's extremely smart. He only missed one day of school in his life. The one day of school that he missed was the first day that Makers barreled bourbon in 1954. So he took that day off, went to the distillery with his family for the first barreling day. Ironically, he didn't learn a lot of the distillery business through his father. He actually learned it. This is another one of these interweaving family things in bourbon. He learned a lot of the industry through Jack Daniel's great nephew, Hap Motlow. Mm-hmm. So Hap actually he was a mentor to him outside of his father. His father was so production centric, and Bill was a creative thinker and a kind of a dreamer kind of person. Even though he had the analytical skills of an engineer and a rocket scientist, he also had the ability to dream and think forward. So he actually had a lot of his distillery business training through Hap Motlow. As a team,
you know the story behind that? I'm sorry.
I want to hear that story. I want to hear that.
Yeah.
So Bill's not just a marketing genius. Bill's a genius, and Bill's about 75 steps ahead of you, and his fuse is about this long when you.
I love that. Yeah.
I have never I've worked beside Bill. Bill's been an official mentor, but I've always worked for Rob. And Bill and I are just chalk and cheese, oil and water. I can play you text messages where he calls just to tell me what my problem is every 2 weeks. And so I love him dearly. He's like the grandfather I never had. So Bill, he is a genius. He was Case Western undergrad, went to Caltech Berkeley, which was his biggest nightmare because he's very conservative, and blew up a building, got kicked out of grad school because he blew up a rocket. He worked on a Polaris missile, like an actual nozzle. This is a true story. Worked for Teller, who would go on to start NASA, be one of the founders of NASA. So he didn't know what to do. So as you do, I'll go to law school. So he actually went to law school at Vanderbilt, and the Motlow's office, the Jack Daniels headquarters, was in Nashville, right near Vanderbilt University. And so Bill wanted a free lunch every day. And so Bill basically would go hang out at the Jack Daniels office because they were all friends. And, you talked about getting the recipe and the weed idea from Pappy. We have a whole wall of people that influenced our brand. Bill Sr. was smart. He went to his friends and he went to the Shapiros. He went to the Beams. He took their expertise to put his distillery together. It's one of the reasons Makers was successful from day one is he had a lot of help from his friends. So Bill's over eating lunch every day and he's hanging out. And so the Motlows think he's just really interested in the industry. Bill just wants a free lunch. Bill is just going to have someone feed him every day. And so when he actually gets out of law school, it was Hap that was like, you seem to be really interested in the business. And Bill was like, I didn't have the heart to say. They just had good lunch and this was just where it was coming. And so Hap was the one that was like, you should go work for your dad. And so not knowing what he was going to do, not wanting to be a lawyer, even though I think he passed the bar. I mean, Bill is out of this world smart. But yeah, I mean, he learned it from going and listening and hearing, but he was going for the food. So I always love that story but it is Jack Daniels. The brands are all very linked, but I mean, I think, without Bill Jr., Makers isn't what it is for sure. And without the Motlows, I don't know that he ever goes back to work for mom and dad. Maybe, but maybe not.
Interesting.
That is interesting. I was wondering how that was tied in, how he ended up with Jack Daniels. So I knew he went to law school at Vandy. He ended up interning at the White House for a time as well. And I couldn't.
He tells that story too. He tells that story on the podcast. Wait till you hear that one. That's really
and I couldn't.
too.
I'm glad I thank you for linking that because I couldn't never figure out at what point in this busy, crazy life did he ever have time to hang out with Motlow, and you would assume it was Tennessee. But then I thought Vanderbilt, okay, that makes sense. And so, I appreciate that. So Jane went over quite a bit of that. He did earn his degree in engineering and physics. He helped design the Gemini and Polaris missile, although not so well, I guess is the way to say it. He ended up going to law school at Vandy. He interned at the White House, and he finally came home, as Jane said, to work for his father at the distillery. Once he was there, his father really didn't want him messing around and screwing up the whiskey. So he put him in charge of marketing, which ended up being probably not intended to be, or maybe it was, but it was a brilliant move. And as weird and smart and quirky as he is, he actually wrote a lot of his own quirky ads. And he obviously gave direction to the marketing team on how they wanted to market the bourbon, market the brand, market Maker's Mark. His mentality was he'd rather be different than right. So that was, if you take a look at a lot of the vintage ads from the 40s, 50s, 60s for bourbon, it's a lot of the same stuff. It's for the most part, it's a bunch of dudes sitting around, drinking bourbon. It's an old crow. It's a couple of crows with a glass of bourbon. It's Four Roses emblem with a glass. It's a lot of the same repetitive stuff. You just insert brand A, insert drink B, and that's what it was. In a minute, I'm going to go through and read off some of the interesting and kind of weird, and in some ways they were groundbreaking. And and back in that time, people weren't they were trying to, there was just a different time. People weren't as vocal about things. They weren't as brazen in public and written publication about opinions and things of that nature. And he was the opposite. I mean, he had a good product. He had a good story, and he had no problems telling it the way he wanted to tell it and advertise it the way he wanted to advertise it. And obviously it took off. One interesting thing was his dad was very much, so obviously Bill's a talker. He's a salesman. He's a guy just wants to be out and about kind of thing. Bill Jr. Bill Sr. was more of a, hey, don't talk about our whiskey to other people. Like I'm not doing interviews and I'm not doing all these things. So he tricked his dad into doing an interview with a reporter from the New York Times by telling him he was a frat friend. He was a buddy from college. He was a frat buddy from college. Come to find out that they ran the article and ran some ads in the New York Times.
Wall Street Journal. Wall Street Journal.
Oh, I'm sorry, Wall Street Journal. Sorry. Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, it's famous for the Wall Street Journal.
Yes, and it absolutely blew up the brand. Phone calls, orders left and right, and that was kind of it was one of the big launching pads for the brand taking off. It was originally like a lot of brands. It was originally a Kentucky only brand, and it was Bill and the sales. He was the main person, but him and the sales team, selling case by case by case to all the different accounts in Kentucky, and they were starting to expand. But once this hit national news publications, they started getting calls off the hook. They started getting sales and expansion into other markets, and the rest is history. It just skyrocketed from there.
And really, it's one of the things that helped bring back bourbon just in general, because they couldn't find Maker's Mark, but people are suddenly interested in bourbon again. So they go out and they try some things. And it's really one of those things that certainly helped Makers, but it also helped the industry, at a time when things were down. And it's one of the moments that helped turn things around.
Yeah. And a part of the genius in his marketing was, in a time where most bourbon companies were what I would call shying away from bold, expensive, flavorful bourbons by reducing it down to 80 proof and kind of trying to make it as close to legally possible as clear spirits and so forth. He was the opposite. He said, our stuff's quality. It costs a little more because it's that damn good. Like that was his mentality. And he
tastes expensive because it is. Yeah.
That's right. So, he had a lot of crazy ads. So I want to go through a few because I thought some were funny, some were cool, some were kind of groundbreaking at the time. One of them was, my tastes are very simple. I only want the best of everything. And all these are ads, obviously, with Maker's bourbon on it. The one Steve talked about is probably the most famous one. It tastes expensive and is. That's pretty simple, right? It's a little pricier than Joe Blow down the street, but guess what? Is that good? And then that's the way we do it. It's too bad you can't find our whiskey at every bump in the road. It's kind of a play on an old saying or whatever. For those who ask how good a whiskey, it says, I like those who ask how good a whiskey is rather than how much. That was one. Homemade slowly was another one of their famous slogans. It's homemade, it's slow made, it's only going to be the best. This one was kind of probably couldn't get away with it today, but I thought it was kind of humorous. Gentlemen may prefer blondes, but it takes a real man to handle a redhead. That goes back to the red wax on the bottle. So I just found that one in a bunch of old ads. I thought it was kind of funny, but there's a ton of those. You guys can Google vintage Maker ads and so forth. You could sit there on the old Google machine all day and take a look at. A lot of them are repetitive, but you can go through, and there's tons of those out there. It's pretty interesting at how this one kind of small Kentucky only brand they just cut through this knife of bourbon struggle and came out on the other side, in some ways on top, in some ways, especially from a quality standpoint. Obviously, nowadays Beam are crazy high sales, and Bullet's crazy high sales. There's some others, but Maker's is crazy high sales, and it's crazy consistent and crazy quality as well. So it's just an interesting. I could have done a 4-hour history thing on the Samuels and stories and so forth, but
see the ads that he even deemed too inappropriate or
oh, I'm sure I would love to see the ones that they just ended up they got to the point where they said, you know what, we probably shouldn't publish this one because it was risky or inappropriate. I would love to read a book of those. It would be
He
amazing.
loves joke ads. Like anytime anything happened and we knew we couldn't actually, he would still make it. And we have a closet at the office. We have a closet of all the like advertisements that were not for public eyes.
Oh my gosh.
I can't even tell you what they are because they're so bad.
That would make it amazing.
They are funny and they are like timely, and you know, it's almost like if there were an SNL of bourbon ads, like that's this closet.
It reminds me of that stupid Talladega Nights where they're doing those really ridiculous commercials where they're just like so over the top, raunchy and stupid that you can't imagine they'd ever be on TV or whatever. But yeah, that's,
you know, like some of them, like the Enron. Do you remember we did the goes down faster than a big 5 accounting firm? And it was like, I mean, yeah, it just, you know, but he was, the biggest thing I've learned from him, to your point, is he's always like, Jane, just do something. And if you're not pissing people off, you're not trying hard enough, right? And I think what happens to big brands is you start playing it safe and you get very risk adverse. And I think he's really tried to challenge that. And Rob is natural. Rob is very different from him. Rob is probably more like his grandfather in a lot of ways. But yeah, I mean, I think he's amazing. Like, I don't know that I'm equipped to work anywhere else after learning from him, but it's definitely, he's one of a kind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
all right. So let's do one last, if you have any left. If you drink all yours, then you have to go on previous notes. Let's go through, everyone take one last review of A and B. We'll give it a quick little shot, see if setting in the glass for a little while gives you anything different.
A little different. I mean, yeah, kind of.
Yeah, A to me, second time around, has a little bit of a more spicy finish than I remember from the first time.
Yeah, a little peanut brittle too on the nose.
Yeah. And B, the nose has gone really heavy, like brown sugar with the cherries. Almost, yeah, it's like super brown sugar.
Yep. Interesting. Okay.
I tell you what, let's start our voting. Let's remind everyone that
we got to keep Jane till last because everyone will want to copy off of her. So
yeah, we'll keep Jane till the very last. Remind everyone that most everybody knows this protocol, but if you don't, we're going to go to you. We want you to give us 2 votes. It doesn't have to be the same for both, but maybe it is. You're voting for which one you like the best and which one you think is the Dusty. And then I'll call you out I'll call everyone out one by one. Steve will tally, and then we will find out who's right and who's wrong at the end.
Yeah, we don't find out who's wrong on the favorite because your favorite's just your favorite.
we only find out who's wrong on the
Dusty. On the Dusty, yes. So Les, you just call it out. Whatever system you've got there is fine by me. I'll mark them down.
All right, we're going to do it old radio talk show style. Let's go, Mike Gaskamp. You're on line 1.
On line 1. All right, I'm going double deuce on this one.
Oh, the double deuce. So he's going 2 is his favorite, and 2 is the Dusty, or B, I guess it would
be. BB. Okay.
B and B. All right. Thanks, Mike. Neil and Melanie Robinson, you're up.
I'm gonna go B and B.
Okay, B and B. All right.
Go. Let's go.
Well, what about Melanie? Let Melanie
I'm sorry, Melanie. Sorry about that.
That's all right. I like A the best now, but I'll probably like B best tomorrow. But I think B is the Dusty.
All right. So she thinks B is the Dusty, but A is the favorite. Okay.
Let's go Scott Cochran.
B and B.
B and B.
B for Scott.
All right. And Scott's wife?
Lisa, A and B.
A is your favorite?
Yes.
Okay. A is your favorite. And B is the Dusty. Okay.
Oh. All right. Let's go to Rob Bean.
I'm going B and B as well, Wes.
All right.
B and B. Okay.
Oh, Mr. Whitlatch. Let's go to Bob.
A puzzles me. It doesn't taste like any makers I've had recently. I'm going to go with A, the Dusty. B is my favorite.
All right.
Okay.
Got a vote for A's the Dusty. I like it.
All right.
See what that does for everyone else here. Let's go, Tom.
Okay, so I the nose on A doesn't do it for me. It's a little light, but it tastes great, of course. And B's got a lot more flavor. And I'm thinking that A is the Dusty, but B is my favorite.
A is the Dusty.
All right. Like it.
B is the favorite. Okay. We're starting to see a trend here.
You are. I like it.
A's coming back.
Like it. Let's go, Kevin Majors. Kevin Majors.
Hey, I'm gonna go with what Bob said. I'm gonna go with A being the Dusty and B being the favorite of mine.
All right. All right. What's our tally, Steve? We're about halfway.
All right. So
everyone.
here's where we're at. So of course we've been trending A on the Dusty recently, but that's just been the last three. So A has 3 votes for the Dusty and 6 for B, and then on the favorite, B is outpacing A 7-2. So
okay.
So yeah.
All right.
That's where we're at.
All right. Let's get back to it. Let's go. Betsy and Nikki.
All right. I think B is the Dusty.
Okay.
But I like A better.
A better. Okay.
And I think B is the Dusty, and I liked B better.
Oh, look at that.
Okay.
I like it. Nice sweatshirt. Go Cats. Let's go, Brad. You're on screen.
All right. I believe A is the Dusty, and I like B better, but I really did go back and forth for the entire show. So
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This is rolling out about like I thought it would for the most part. All right. So I see Scott, but I don't think that's Scott in front of me.
It's Kathy.
Hey, Kathy. Sorry.
That's okay.
I was like, wait a minute.
I use his computer.
No problem.
I thought I was going to be the only one, and then Bob Whitlatch chimed in. I agree with him. I think A is the Dusty, and I like B better.
All right. Thank you. Oh, let's go to JL.
All right. So I think it's both B. So I love B. It's got that butterscotch note that I just love. It's sugar's juicy. And I think that's a Dusty too. So I'm going to go double B.
Double B.
Okay.
All right. Michael, did you go? I'm sorry, I'm losing track here.
I don't think.
No, I haven't.
Oh, I didn't think so. You're up, sir.
I'm going to say A is the Dusty, and I do like B better.
All right. Stephanie McNew.
Okay, so I think it's funny so far, following trend, that most of the women are liking A better, and I do too, but I think B is the Dusty.
All right. 9 out of 10 women prefer A. I don't know if that's a real stat or not, but
That's not according to our data thus far, but
okay,
yes.
not according to data.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, he has a vote. Oh, yeah, we also have a vote from Eric Johnson. He's a double B guy.
Double B. He has our longest streak, so him getting in on this could perhaps either save or end his streak. Either way, he doesn't get. It would have ended his streak not being here. So BB is his official vote. So he's at 3 right now. That's our longest streak. We had the legend up there, got 16 in a row. He reeled off 16 straight before getting the last 2 wrong, actually. So yeah, that's our record.
I think we're through everyone except for. Let me double check real quick here. Tom, you went, correct, sir?
Yeah, he went.
Okay, yeah, I thought he did. All right, so Legend, you're up, sir.
Did you get Rob B? Did he vote?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Pretty sure.
Okay, he's good. Just making sure.
Legend, you're up.
All right, the Legend.
You're on mute, sir.
Asked to unmute.
That was making it harder for me to get that through. Double B.
Double B.
Double B. Right. Okay.
So Steve, you would be next, and then we'll go to Jane.
Boy, this is tough. This is tough. I like B better. I'll say that. And I've gone back and forth on the Dusty here, but I think my initial vote was B, and then I was like, oh no, it's definitely A. But I'm going to say B. I'm just going to lock that in. So I'm officially locked in with B. BB on the votes.
All right, Jane, you're up. We think you're probably going to hit it on the head, but if you don't, we won't share this with makers.
Right,
We won't
right.
share this with Denny or anyone else.
B is the Dusty, and I wish I had proofed it. I meant to proof it in the lab before I came today. The bottle age on it is good. I'm going to be difficult. When I first opened these and tasted, I liked B. As they've sat and opened up, B to me has gone. Like, it has deteriorated very quickly. And now I like, if I'm sipping, I would rather drink A. If I'm like, hey, let's, have a quick drink, and then B was, so I like both in different ways, but B has deteriorated very quickly for me as we've sat here for an hour.
So your A is officially your favorite then for the evening?
I'm paid.
I'm going to put that down. I'm going to put that down.
I like them both.
All right. Fair enough. Fair enough. But
all right. So what's our final tally, Steve?
So our final tally looks like this. On the favorite, B definitely outpaced A 15-5. So it was the favorite of the night for sure. Now, when it comes to Dusty, it got interesting. B jumped out to the quick lead and really never gave it up, but it did get a little bit of a threat from A, but it ends up being 14-6. 14-6 is the difference there. So B, according to us, B officially is the Dusty, but we did have 6 people vote for A as the Dusty. So there is a decent amount there, but that's where we're at, Wes.
So basically it's the majority is B is the Dusty and B is the favorite. Is that what you're
correct? BB is the vote of the night.
All right. Well, there are only a handful of people left that are allowed to drink makers because they banned the rest of us. B is the Dusty for sure.
B is the Dusty. All right. Hey, we got it.
We got it. All right.
We got it. We got it.
I think probably as I was pouring these, I knew that the color would probably give away for the most part what the Dusty was. It's a bit darker in the glass, at least side by side. But I will say, part of the reason I love doing the makers is the theme of consistency and so forth. Yes, there were some nuanced differences, but between both, they had a very similar mouthfeel, a very similar finish. I got the cherry on both. I got a lot of the elements of the brown sugar and the creme brulee on both. I would say of all of the Dusty events we've completed, I would say that this one's probably sample A to sample B is probably as close and consistent as any we've done.
Yeah. So I think the consistency showed through here. So very cool. Very cool. Let's hear it for Wes. Great job by Wes tonight. Let's hear it for Jane Bowie as well.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
We'll open up for just a couple of questions. We don't keep our guests on too late because they'll never come back. So, but we do have time. We'll do just a couple questions. So if anybody has a question, open up. I see Melanie has got her hand up.
Yes, Jane, how often are the barrels rotated, and is that timing adjusted based on the weather in any particular year?
So the barrels are only rotated one time in their life. So the idea is the first 3 years of their life, they're staying at the top, and the last 3 years of their life, they're spending on the bottle. On average, as Wes said, we're about 6 years old. And so they're rotated once. And the idea is giving each barrel as close to the same life cycle where those middle barrels don't move. So we will start rotation in August. We don't now finish up rotation until about June because it takes our warehouse team that long, about 10 months to rotate those 200,000 plus barrels.
So I've got a piggyback question onto that. So when the panel are tasting the top tiers and they're trying to determine, are they, you could say that, at 3 years they're moving, but if they're not ready or they're beyond ready or whatever, is there a certain taste profile or a certain specific item where they're starting to get too spicy, or is there something specific where when the taste panel tastes it, they're like, all right, this one's ready because it's starting to trend this way, or how does that kind of determine?
We're looking at extraction rates, and we're also using HPLC, which is high pressure liquid chromatography, to actually look at if it's in spec. And so it's really just, I'll be honest, 3 to 4 years old at Makers, the whiskey tastes like shit. Not shit, but it's that's our rough period. Like
that's real there, folks. Yeah.
My experience is the first 2 years of a whiskey's life, you're like, oh, and then the wood starts getting more aggressive with the spirit, and it has this like battle for a couple of years, and then it kind of mellows back out. That's our product. I can't speak for anyone else. So I find at 3 years old, you're not like, ooh, this is great. You're just looking at, is the extraction rate where it needs to be? Is there enough oak influence for what we're looking for to now take it down? Or does it need more time in this environment that's going to push it more into the wood to pull more of those wood goodies out, is really what we're looking at. Please don't edit that to be like, our whiskey tastes like shit.
So you're saying pulling the wood goodies out is a good thing?
It is. So basically it's all about, maturation. And I know Weebring's talked about this, Steve, before,
right?
It's not just extraction. Extraction's a big part. And that's really what's happening in the beginning. And as it goes into the red layer, it's pulling out different things. And then when it comes out, it's really the cold is letting all those things come together, and how it starts to oxidize and change and react with all those different compounds interacting. So for us, the philosophy is get it to the top, pull out a lot, and then take it down and let all of those flavors start reacting and mellow out. You're still getting extraction at the bottom, but nothing like you do at the top. It's why your Happy Van Winkles, they're never seeing anything but the basement or the floor of a warehouse, right? Because they're going so long, and your proofs are higher at the top. You're losing more drastically. Like I honestly, I can't imagine if we left something up there for 15, there'd be nothing left. We clock it at about 123 degrees on a typical June afternoon when you get to the top of that warehouse. So it's really, we're wanting it's about getting into the wood and pulling out all the flavor that's there.
Yeah. Question came in from Tom, just real quick. When did 46 get released? When did that start coming out?
July of 2010.
July 2010. There you go.
Hey, I got a question if you could. Do you know what Bill's thought process was when he did a private select with all 10 staves being 46?
He was annoyed by the whole thing. That's the last time he came to an innovation meeting is Mocha. He was like, this is terrible. And we said, you're not our target demographic anymore. No, you know what's hilarious about that? Like, he hates cast strength bourbons. I don't know if you all know this about him.
No,
He hates high proof bourbon. So like, I remember when we were getting ready to launch RC6 and I went to meet him in his office, and I'm like, it's our first limited release. I can't wait to hear what you think. And he's like, is it any good? Like, do people like this? He's like, it's just so strong. So honestly, that private select, that cast strength 46, there's no way he's drinking that neat. I'm just telling you, because he, like, that 94 proof was his sweet spot. And the whole reason we originally launched a 46 cask we were supposed to do this huge tour in 2020, and it was his 80th birthday, and it was the 10-year anniversary of 46, and we were going to launch it at cast strength to piss him off. And then we were going to take him on tour and let people roast the hell out of him to raise money for charity. And we didn't get to do it because of COVID. But that was the whole reason we were going to launch that. We did a small launch nationally, was just to piss him off, honestly.
You gotta love it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. He's such a good sport. Like, people would have paid a lot of money to stand up and roast him, I think.
I think so too. Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
All
so
right,
unfortunately, yeah, robbed of COVID by that. So anything else for Jane?
Yes,
Okay.
but I would rather it be after you turn the recording off.
Well, we don't make Jane stay for that, but yes.
Stay for one question, Jane.
Stay
It's
for
relevant.
one question.
It's
Okay.
industry relevant.
Yeah. What are the chances to get a 12-year-old Makers? Will they ever do anything like that where they have an age-stated older version of Makers?
We can make it, figure out how to make it not taste like shit. Yeah. I mean, the reality is it's about balance, right? And I think the one thing we learned through that injury proof experiment, Steve, right, is the water, the lower proof is pulling out more from the wood. So there are things you could definitely do to combat it. But the truth is, after about 8 years old, our whiskey starts to get really out of balance. And whether you like it or not, that's a personal choice. But part of my job and our job is really about getting everything working in harmony. And we've not really figured out how to make a 12-year-old Makers taste great, meaning you're still getting different nuances without the wood just beating it up. And I think it's really about how do you get the tannins out of the way and focus on esterification and some of those things that come later on. So I think we know enough to probably figure it out, but I wouldn't hold your breath.
Okay. But if you do, again, what you've managed to keep doing time after time is take the same product and repackage it into something else. And again, let's be very clear, Makers still really only has one product, but you just do it in different ways. So cast strength or, all these different things that you've done, which is cool. This could be, again, something that maybe it's just always on the first floor or something like that. 12 years on the first floor.
My mom says it's just wearing a different costume.
Yeah.
So
I don't know. Yeah.
maybe.
Okay. Fine.
Stay tuned. I don't know. Maybe.
Anything? We got time for one more.
I have one fair question on camera.
Wait a minute. Is this on the camera or off the camera?
Yeah, on the camera.
All right. This is the last one then.
Do you know if Makers sells more still 90 proof Makers or combination Makers Mark and all the stave program barrels?
Well, they do sell a lot of that, but I still think it's got to be Makers.
Oh,
Makers
gosh,
is everywhere.
no.
Makers is just
Makers is our bread and butter.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's house brands at many bars. I mean, it's you go to wedding receptions, they might only have Makers. I mean,
know.
Makers is
That
just
goes-
so everywhere. Yeah.
That goes to my part B of the question. I don't want to ask online. So
Okay. There you go. All right. With that, I do want to say thank you to Jane Bowie. What a great guest she was tonight. Gave us a history, fun, brings a casual nature to these things that it's personality. It's personality.
You're very casual.
Casual is good because that's what we like. We don't like fake corporate people. You're not a fake corporate person, Jane. Clearly you're not.
That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me.
You're a normal person. Yes, which is cool. That's what we want. We want you coming in. We respect what you do. We respect the brand. We love the brand. But it's nice to come in and have a real person come in, not a button-down suit, be like, oh, okay, not sure we're going to taste this. No, you're not like that at all. You tell them how it is. I love it.
Well, thank you all. This was so much fun. Wes, thank you for all the work on this.
Wes did a great job too. So
Thank you for joining. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
We don't have old Makers. Rob and Bill give away all our whiskey to people. We don't have any Makers sitting around.
Just gave it away. Yeah.
So yeah.
Very cool. Very cool, folks. We do have 4 tickets still left. I don't want to have 4 tickets left to we're doing this with a 50-year-old Yellowstone bourbon with Steve Beam on here. I want that thing sold out. We got 4 tickets left. We got to pick up those 4 tickets. These have to be sold out.
What's the date on that?
That is February 7th. February 7th, we're doing a Yellowstone. I'll put a link to that. Also, I do a follow-up email, as we know, that'll have the link to the video. That'll have a couple podcasts. I'll have the Bill Samuels podcast. I'll also send you one with Dave Pickerel, where he talks some great stories too from the other side, talking a little bit about Bill Samuels and some of the things that happened to him when he was there. Very cool. And then of course I'll include the link to the Limestone event where we tasted some 50-year-old Yellowstone. And then Wes has got a couple more events will be coming up. We'll start getting those posted in the next couple of days. So look for some more of those coming up very soon. With that, we'll say goodbye and thanks a lot. I'll stick around if you have any questions or anything like that. I will stick around and talk to you guys soon. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jane.
Good night.
Good night.